Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, July the 3rd, and Keir Starmer is trying to shore up his Chancellor. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And my name is Sam Coates of Sky News. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need about the day ahead in British politics in just 20 minutes. For the first time in living memory, tears moved markets yesterday as the cost of borrowing spiked because of fears Rachel Reeves might be replaced as Chancellor by somebody who could borrow even more.
But the Prime Minister intervened last night to insist that there are private, very personal reasons behind Rachel Reeves's visible emotions there during Prime Minister's questions. And it's an intervention timed before the markets open today to say that the pair are working in lockstep. We think together was a line that he used that was emphatic. She would be Chancellor for a long time to come.
This came after you could see Rachel Reeves visibly sobbing in a Prime Minister's questions where, bluntly, she was already going to be the centre of attention and she was the target of Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader. The tears were reflecting off the lights in the Commons chamber. She was wiping away them off her face, and you could see her trying to hold in and suck in her emotions, particularly as the Prime Minister appeared to be paying tribute to all the things she did in what felt a bit to me like a retrospective. But of course, he insists she's staying put.
Well, the reaction was immediate in the market. The cost of borrowing for 30-year government debt rose 20 basis points past 5.4%, not something being seen in comparable markets to the UK, so quite specific. The pound was also the worst performing major currency in the world on Wednesday, with a 1% slump against the dollar, and there was a fall in stocks. Now, some of that then did rally, but it really sent the signal that there was deep concern. And the question is whether that was because if you've got a finance minister who is visibly distressed, that clearly is not sending a great message across the world and to the markets, or was it also because of fears that Rachel Reeves would go? I mean, that's still open to interpretation.
I got a call from somebody who works in the markets immediately after Prime Minister's questions, and they said that there was a market reaction because they were worried that the Chancellor was about to go imminently, something that clearly hasn't happened yet. And might not happen. But the timing is inescapable because this has been the worst week for Rachel Reeves since she became Chancellor. It's also the worst possible one-year anniversary for this government because on Tuesday night, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, in order to get through some disability legislation, blew a massive further black hole in the public finances by abandoning their attempts to get savings. So adding an additional nearly £6 billion onto the black hole, Rachel Reeves now has to find £20 billion a year from somewhere in time for the November budget. And the pressure on her is immense already. And we'll discuss the politics of that and what's going on in the Labour Party more widely, along with the 10-year plan in a little bit. But before we do anything else, Anne, what do we think we know about what's going on with Rachel Reeves?
Well, the assumption yesterday, perhaps naturally enough, given what had happened the night before and the trauma of what had to happen to that welfare and disability bill to get it through, the concessions that had to be made, which were obviously, as you mentioned there, Sam, gouging out the savings that Reeves was hoping to get, that she'd simply been overwhelmed by really the failure of that big attempt so dramatically. But then, of course, it emerged that she'd had another altercation with the Speaker of the Commons over speaking too long, as he saw it, at Treasury questions, etc., the day before. That said, when you looked at Rachel Reeves and thought about it a bit, you could see that this looked like someone who was in deep, deep distress, as well, personal distress, as well as politics or just kind of work stress. And friends of Reeves and her family were underlining to me last night that the reason for her tears was wholly personal and very serious and sensitive. It was wrong, they were saying, for a lot of the media to jump to the conclusion that she simply hadn't been able to kind of cope with what was going wrong in the politics and in her day job. Well, that does fit with Keir Starmer's explanation that he wouldn't intrude on her privacy, which also seemed to underline that. Now, it would, I think, be unconscionable and wouldn't happen in this public glare for them to be kind of making excuses about that, if you see what I mean, if that were not true. But the question is, in such an exposed, prominent position as the Chancellor, where your demeanour and your emotions really count politically and in the markets, is that a sustainable position, or will Rachel Reeves have to give at least a little more of an explanation to the backdrop?
That's really interesting. And so you are saying that you have heard from friends of Rachel Reeves that there is a significant personal issue here at the heart of it. As you say, it was a little bit unclear yesterday. I'm not sure that her team did her massive favours immediately after Prime Minister's questions. There was a statement which just said, "It's personal. We won't say any more." I have to say, my immediate instinct was, well, they're telling me that tears are personal and they're not going to expand on what happened in the Commons chamber. It was only roughly 6 o'clock when there was a second intervention, this time from Downing Street, making clear that the tears were the result of a personal and private issue, that I started to really realise that there was something else on the agenda here. And so I think my sense now is that there is something going on in Rachel Reeves' private life that we don't know about, that is enormously sensitive, and people would of course give her some space for that. The problem that we've got is we're in a really, really difficult political week. Just take that altercation with the Speaker. What we are told is that as part of Lindsay Hoyle remonstrating with the Chancellor over what he perceived as her talking back to him, she told him that this week she is under so much pressure. And we know that that is true politically as well, because the pressure here on somebody upon whom the nation responds, upon whose actions quite visibly change the cost of borrowing, the amount that Britain is paying in debt interest, and the sort of health of the markets. The whole thing is very hard to disentangle, and it is all quite uncomfortable. So I think everybody would, of course, respect a personal and difficult moment for anybody, and we are all occasionally humans in this business, but there is so much going on. It is a little bit hard to unpick the political from things that are going on personally. And also, if I don't think anybody in the world would have batted an eyelid had Rachel Reeves not appeared at Prime Minister's questions yesterday. Senior ministers often are not there, and there might have been the odd remark by the leader of the opposition, but I don't think seriously. You always keep a roll call of everybody in the front bench every week, and I think your sort of heart goes out to Rachel Reeves for having to sit through that incredibly public moment, if there were other things going on in her life.
Yeah, though I do think, Sam, after what had happened the night before, now remember we've come out of two extraordinarily dramatic days in the Commons. I think if she hadn't appeared the morning after that bill got decimated, in which she had such a strong interest as Chancellor, for it to work out better, to get those 5 billion of savings, which are now nowhere to be seen, I think that would have been remarked on. I think it would have been where's the absent Chancellor, and I think that was the pressure point on her, or she felt it, to appear, which in hindsight, as you say, it would have been wiser had she not. She didn't look, if you think of it as a workplace, she didn't look like someone who shouldn't have been at work that day. She looked like she needed to take care of herself. And I think as the initial, we're not going to give you any more information, by her team, I think that was a kind of shock response, a holding pattern that was clearly not going to work out. Interesting, perhaps, that Keir Starmer's reaction, obviously seeing that the markets were going to be very affected by this, is he had to go so far out there to support his Chancellor, which she'd not quite done and not given that guarantee. I think this sort of she's going nowhere, which is, shall we say, a little ambiguous as a way of phrasing things at the moment. It feels like quite a lot of things are going nowhere in terms of the government's business. I do think that's an unfortunate phrase, and I don't know why they keep using it. But there you go, unsolicited comms advice from this podcast. But now he's really tied himself to Reeves, hasn't he? He said she's going to be Chancellor to the next election. I think he said at one point and beyond. So from being a Chancellor who didn't seem to have support to stay in the moment, in order to reassure the markets, he's now, and I do think there you do feel the fire under their feet that he's having to make those very, very long commitments, which are really tying Keir Starmer closely to whatever happens to his Chancellor.
That's right. Look, leaving Rachel Reeves aside for a moment, I think the heat on Keir Starmer himself is massive. Now, we've discussed a couple of times this week that there is a political and economic credibility issue for this government. And there was a bit of a landmark moment for me yesterday. I started to get people suggesting to me that actually Keir Starmer might not make it through the entire parliament himself. Now, I got a minister, a member of Keir Starmer's government, who, as they were describing themselves to me as a loyalist, was saying that if at the elections next year, which are local elections where there are Scottish elections and Welsh elections, the Welsh Senedd could end up going to reform and Labour might not take back the Scottish Parliament, and who knows what will happen in London. Maybe there could be gains for the Greens and other left-wing parties. If all of that happens, then at that point, Keir Starmer probably should and would go, and starting to put a question mark on whether or not his longevity is guaranteed, given he just doesn't appear to have a very clear sense of direction. I was talking to another Labour MP who was broadly saying the same. They said literally he's toast if it goes badly next May. They thought that there is just quite a short window between now and Keir Starmer's conference speech where he can convince his party and the country that he knows where he's taking everybody, that he's not a sort of empty vessel that just puts reasonableness at the heart of his premiership, but doesn't really know how to choose between the big political trade-offs that you've got to make if you're sitting in number 10. But for the first time yesterday, I was getting people saying the clock is ticking somewhat, which was amazing. Look, it's very hard to get rid of Labour leaders under the much more complicated rules that make it difficult, much more difficult than the Conservatives. But, Anne, of course, rules and mechanisms to eject leaders are not the reason that the last handful of prime ministers have ended up leaving office. If your own side is sufficiently unhappy with you, you go. And I was very struck yesterday. I was starting to pick up that conversation.
Well, me too. And I picked up that conversation very directly, in fact, for an interview that I did with Maurice Glassman, Lord Glassman, the blue Labour guru who combines social conservatism with, as he sees it, a recipe, a post-liberal recipe, which he thinks Labour needs to thrive in the times in which we're now in which it has to govern. And his view was that Keir Starmer has 6 months. He says he has 6 months to prove what it takes. He has what it takes to lead Labour into the next election. I give him 6 months, he says. It's going to be quite a significant period there. He was suggesting all sorts of changes that the Prime Minister should make. And that, tantalisingly, I leave it there because the podcast is out. We've got a special episode interview that I've done for Westminster Insider out tomorrow. Why is that interesting, as well as Maurice Glassman, just an interesting figure in the Labour intellectual debate? He's very close to Morgan McSweeney. And I'm giving away too much for my own podcast now, but I think he's become even closer to Morgan McSweeney in Downing Street and is basically saying this has to work, and you can't just send mixed messages about what this government should be. And Keir Starmer would have to change a lot. So as well as a bit of in-house advertising there, I do think it fits exactly with what you're hearing, Sam, is that there are a lot of people who are just saying, yes, all right, Rachel Reeves took the heat for a particularly unfortunate, set of circumstances for her and the vote this week. But the clue to being Prime Minister is in the word prime. So it's going to be about him.
Wow. Maurice Glassman is Lord Glassman, inescapably a big figure. If he is saying that about Keir Starmer's future being potentially time limited. That will resonate with a wing of the Labour Party that was already quite uncomfortable. And that suggests, I mean, again, all of this on the first anniversary, it is not the victory lap that they would have wanted. Let's just go very quickly and pivot on to something else, because this is the moment where this government is meant to sort out arguably its biggest priority, the NHS, and the NHS 10-year plan. What's in it?
Finally, it's here. I feel we've been waiting for the NHS 10-year plan for something like a decade, but time moves both fast and slow at the moment. So at its heart, West Streeting is laying that out today. At its heart, 200 new neighbourhood health centres offering scans, outpatients, appointments, mental health therapy, which of course links back to the fact that so many people are being declared unable to work or part-time work because of their mental health, and a host of services, crucially without needing to go to hospital. Thousands more GPs are being promised, fewer hospital consultants will be trained, and this is part of a big push to shift healthcare closer to home. Also, improvements to the technological base of the NHS. This is something I know from conversations with West Streeting that he's become more and more convinced about. It's not often the way that Labour has presented healthcare reforms. It's tended to count inputs, so and so many more doctors and nurses. If you look at this, it's very much about infrastructure, about big things that need to change. And it's a model that's espoused by a lot of the reforms that I've looked at internationally over the years. And Streeting has become very inspired by Netherlands, Australia, Norway, to name but a few, where you get the hospitals more as hubs, obviously as emergencies and for big surgery and aftercare, etc. But a lot more treatment delivered and monitored in the home, with patients being more active themselves and digital interaction. Of course, all that works if you can upgrade the system and the workforce to work in that very different way in the NHS. It is very ambitious. Is the money and is the way of approaching it in the NHS up to it?
We will see. Of course, in the spending review, health day-to-day spending got an uplift, but there was no additional capital spending, investment spending in the spending review to sort of build loads of things. So they're going to have to rely on the money that was doled out in the budget last year in order to fund this and future kind of cash. What I think is striking is, of course, that there are lots of areas that the NHS depends on working well that I don't think are being touched. The most obvious thing is I don't think that social care really gets a look in today. Louise Casey is, of course, reporting back properly the year before the general election with what to do on social care. So that's in the long grass. I'll be looking to see what they say about the workforce. The workforce for the NHS is like knackered or on strike. And again, the public purse is incredibly tight when it comes to pay rises. And I think if we end up falling into another round of strikes during this parliament, any kind of meaningful reform is going to be really, really hard. There is a prevention element at today's 10-year plan. Some of the more eye-catching things to sort of ban advertising and make it harder to buy unhealthy products were shelved. But I think there'll be an incentive structure for supermarkets to sell healthier food. One thing that I am personally very interested in is the use of AI, not least because of the conversations that we've been having that AI has been inventing between you and me. And there is, in the government press release, a promise that AI scribes will end the need for clinical note-taking to free up clinicians' time. Now, I did a little mini investigation into this a week ago. I'm going to put it back on my social media feed, and I found it utterly fascinating, and I really would urge people to watch this. Basically, AI will record all the conversations that you have with your doctor, and then AI will create the notes. And the idea is that it's a massive time-saving device for doctors, allowing them to treat more patients and all the rest of it. I think the principle of all conversations with your doctor being recorded is a big shift that people might be uncomfortable with. But then the idea of AI working out which bits matter and which bits don't, and how the emphasis works, and potentially even triggering health consequences as a result of that interaction. Well, that is a big leap, particularly when AI is far from perfect. And there are people, the NHS is worried about people looking to AI companies looking to make a quick buck off the NHS. And NHS England sent out a warning letter that I got hold of and the HSJ got hold of, saying, look, there are sharks out there that don't conform to standards. You've got to be very, very careful here. So if AI is at the heart of this plan, I would venture people ask, is AI quite ready? Because if it's just for saving money and it's getting jobs that humans otherwise would do, is 95 or 90% accuracy good enough for the NHS?
Well, I have a bit of a different default setting about this, I should say. I mean, we'll have to have a whole new look at it. We're on in a different episode. There's just too much to dive in today. But I do not see a future for the NHS to fulfill the needs and wants of the population without a massive technological shift. And right now, whether we like it or not, that means investing in AI. And there says obviously if you're very good point out of what you've seen and research dug around there is that if you get bad AI and use it badly, it's going to be it's going to be deleterious. Then I completely agree with you, Sam. But if you say the idea that doctors are sitting there while you are talking, typing things into their computer, which is in effect they're in a digital interface, whereas a lot of the time you go to see your GP, they're trying to make records all the time. So the fact that AI could just simply do that and then be monitored for accuracy is a big time and cost saving. Also, because a lot of cases and presentations are broadly the same. The difficulty, and you're right to hold me to task on this, is what do you do if AI misses something? What do you do if you get into those hallucinations and shadow diagnosis? It often diagnoses, for instance, things that aren't there. So it doesn't take out the role of the clinician. It does need to change, and I think where Streeting has accepted that also by the time this rolls out, AI will hopefully be more accurate because you'll have kept testing it till it is, Sam, with all your reporting. I would just say finally, error reduction is a huge focus here as well, because there is simply too much variation between the health trusts on really dangerous and sometimes errors that cost lives that you cannot explain by the demographics. And I think Streeting has become incredibly worried about how widespread this is and wants this reform to address that. We'll have to impart more of it.
That's all very sensible. That's not the really controversial debate. The really controversial debate is who decides which AI companies are safe. And at the moment, NHS England is ducking that and leaving it to hundreds and hundreds of health trusts and individual organisations to work out their way through GDPR and compliance thickets to work out which of these companies that are banging on their door going, please pay for me, please use me, is safe. Because I think NHS England, in its final month, doesn't want the liability. That's where the debate is, and it is the NHS at its core slightly ducking a responsibility that people across the country in the NHS are dying to see leadership from it. That's I think the issue.
Well, right now, no amount of AI can solve the purely human problems that seem to be afflicting the government in certainly, I think, one of the most eventful weeks, Sam, since I started being on this podcast with you. Neither of us have slept much in the last 2 to 3 days, and that must go double for everyone at the front of the action there in the Labour Party and across the Commons.
That's right. Well, let's see how it shakes down over the weekend after that first anniversary. We'll be back on Monday. I look forward to seeing you then, Anne.
See you then.